It was supposed to be a routine evening for Arjun Patel, the newly appointed police chief of Millstone, a small town still struggling with its past. Dressed in casual clothes, he had decided to take a late-night stroll after a long day at the station, wanting to get a feel for the community he now served. As he walked past a small convenience store, he noticed two patrol officers parked nearby. Their eyes locked onto him immediately. Arjun could sense it, the scrutiny, the suspicion. He had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the signs. Moments later, flashing lights lit up the street, and the sound of sirens broke the night's silence. The officers stepped out of their car, hands resting on their holsters. "You! Stop right there," one of them barked. Arjun sighed and turned around slowly. "Is there a problem, officers?" "Hands where we can see them," the second officer ordered. "We got a call about a suspicious person in the area." Arjun raised an eyebrow. "A suspicious person? Walking?" "Enough with the attitude," the first officer snapped. "ID, now." Reaching for his wallet, Arjun calmly handed over his credentials. The officers snatched it from his hand, but the moment they read the name and title, their expressions changed. "Chief Patel," one of them mumbled, his face draining of color. "That's right," Arjun said, folding his arms. "And you just detained your own boss." The silence between them was deafening. The officers fumbled for words, stammering apologies, but Arjun held up a hand. "Save it," he said firmly. "Meet me at the station first thing in the morning. We have a lot to discuss about how you police this town." Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving the officers standing in stunned silence, their reality forever shifted. The two officers stood frozen, still processing what had just happened. Their stomachs churned as they realized the gravity of their mistake. Officer Reynolds, the younger of the two, looked at his partner, Officer Carter, whose face had turned pale. "We're screwed, aren't we?" he muttered. Carter swallowed hard. "Yeah. Big time." Neither of them could sleep that night. The next morning, they arrived at the station early, their nerves on edge. They sat outside the chief's office, waiting, dreading what was coming. When the door finally opened, Arjun Patel stood there, expression unreadable. "Come in," he said. They stepped inside and sat stiffly across from him. Arjun leaned back in his chair, studying them for a long moment. "Tell me," he said, "what made me suspicious last night?" Carter shifted uncomfortably. We got a report about someone loitering." Arjun nodded. "Aha. And did I match any description?" Reynolds hesitated before shaking his head. "No, sir." "Then why did you stop me?" Arjun's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. The officers had no good answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Arjun exhaled. "This isn't just about me. What if I had been any other black man walking through that neighborhood? Would you have treated him the same way?" Carter cleared his throat. "Sir, we didn't mean." "But you did," Arjun cut in. "You did mean to stop me. You did assume I didn't belong." Reynolds lowered his head. "We messed up." "Yes, you did," Arjun agreed. "But the real question is, what are you going to do about it?" The officers exchanged glances. They expected a suspension, maybe even termination, but Arjun had something else in mind. "You're going to spend the next 3 months in community outreach programs. You're going to meet the people you claim to protect. You'll walk these streets without your badges and listen to their experiences." Carter blinked. "And if we refuse?" Arjun's eyes hardened. "Then you can hand in your badges right now." The room went silent again. Then, slowly, both officers nodded. "We'll do it," Reynolds said. Arjun leaned forward. "Good. Because if you want to wear that uniform, you better understand what it truly means to serve." As they left his office, the weight of the lesson settled in. They had started the night thinking they were in control, but now, they were the ones learning. The next few weeks were nothing short of eye-opening for Officers Carter and Reynolds. Their first assignment in the community outreach program was to attend a town hall meeting in one of Millstone's predominantly black neighborhoods. Sitting in a crowded room filled with people who didn't trust them was a humbling experience. A man named Darnell, a local business owner, stood up and spoke directly to them. "We don't feel safe with you around. You pull us over for no reason, follow us through stores like we're criminals, and last week, my nephew was stopped just for jogging at night. What are you protecting us from? Ourselves?" Carter shifted in his seat, the shame burning through him. He wanted to defend himself, to say they were just doing their jobs, but for the first time, he realized how empty that sounded. Reynolds finally spoke. I can't change what's already happened. But I can promise to do better." Darnell crossed his arms. "Words are cheap, officer." And he was right. Their next assignment placed them in a local youth center, where they spent time mentoring teenagers who had grown up distrusting the police. A boy named Malik, barely 16, was the first to challenge them. "You only care now 'cause you got caught," he said bluntly. "If Chief Patel hadn't been the one you stopped, you wouldn't be here, would you?" Carter had no response. But over time, their presence began to mean something. They listened more than they spoke. They helped tutor kids after school, played basketball in the community park, and attended neighborhood cleanups. It was exhausting work, and not everyone forgave them, but they weren't there for forgiveness. They were there to learn. One evening, after a long day, Reynolds and Carter sat outside the community center, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Crazy how different it looks from this side, huh?" Reynolds muttered. Carter nodded. "Yeah. We thought we knew this town. Turns out we only knew half of it." 3 months later, they stood in front of Chief Patel's desk once again. "So," Arjun said, arms crossed. "What did you learn?" Carter took a deep breath. "That being a cop isn't just about enforcing laws. It's about building trust. And we broke that trust." Reynolds nodded. "We also learned that respect isn't automatic just because of a badge. You have to earn it." A small smile tugged at the corner of Arjun's lips. "Good. Because your real work starts now." From that day forward, Carter and Reynolds were no longer just officers. They became a part of the community they once feared. They walked the streets differently, not as enforcers, but as protectors, ones who finally understood the people they served. Months passed, and the changes in Officers Carter and Reynolds did not go unnoticed. The community, once wary of their presence, began to acknowledge them in small but significant ways. A nod from a shop owner. A casual wave from a teenager they had once mentored. A simple, "Good morning, officer," instead of cold silence. But true tests of change don't come in quiet moments. They come when everything is on the line. One evening, a call came over the radio, an armed robbery in progress at a local gas station. Carter and Reynolds were the closest officers in the area. As they sped toward the scene, Reynolds glanced at his partner. "Let's do this the right way," he said. When they arrived, they saw a young man, no older than 20, holding a trembling cashier at gunpoint. The kid was scared, his hands shaking as he shouted demands. The old Carter might have drawn his weapon immediately. The old Reynolds might have barked orders without thinking. But now, they saw something different, a terrified kid on the verge of a mistake that could ruin his life. Carter raised his hands, keeping his voice calm. "Hey, man, what's your name?" The young man flinched. Devon," he stammered, gripping the gun tighter. "Okay, Devon," Carter said, taking a slow step forward. "Listen, I know you don't want to do this. Whatever's going on, this isn't the way." "Shut up. You don't know me." Devon's eyes darted around the room, panic setting in. Reynolds took a deep breath. "You're right, we don't. But we want to. Tell us what's wrong, man. No one has to get hurt." Devon's grip loosened slightly. I just needed money," he admitted, his voice breaking. "For my mom's meds. She's sick, and we got nothing left." Carter's chest tightened. He knew the system wouldn't care about Devon's reasons if this ended badly. "I hear you," Carter said gently. "But this ain't the way. You walk out of here with us, we'll figure something out. No one has to get hurt." A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Devon's shoulders slumped. Tears welled in his eyes as he lowered the gun and set it on the counter. Reynolds stepped forward, cuffing him gently. "You made the right choice, kid," he said softly. As they walked Devon outside, Carter spotted Chief Patel standing near his car, watching. Their eyes met, and Arjun gave a small nod, one of approval, of understanding. Later that night, as Carter and Reynolds sat in their patrol car, exhaustion settling in, Reynolds let out a long breath. "We did good tonight," he said. Carter nodded. "Yeah. And tomorrow, we do it again." Because real change wasn't about one moment. It was about showing up, day after day, and proving they had learned. The next morning, Carter and Reynolds sat in Chief Patel's office, going over the night's events. "You handled that situation well," Arjun said, his fingers interlocked as he studied them. "No force, no unnecessary escalation. That's the kind of policing this town needs." Reynolds let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thanks, Chief. We saw him differently this time." Carter nodded. "A year ago, I probably would have seen a threat. Now, I saw a kid making a bad choice, but not a bad kid." Arjun leaned back in his chair, pleased. "That's growth. But don't get comfortable. The real work isn't about one robbery or one kid. It's about building trust, day after day." They knew he was right. A new perspective. Over the next few months, Carter and Reynolds continued their work in the community. They didn't just respond to calls, they showed up at school events, helped with food drives, and stopped by local businesses just to talk. One afternoon, they were patrolling when they spotted Malik, the teenager who had challenged them during their outreach program. He was shooting hoops alone at the community court. Reynolds nudged Carter. "Let's see if the kid can actually play." Malik smirked as they approached. "Y'all about to embarrass yourselves." "What, just 'cause we wear badges?" Carter laughed, taking off his duty belt and setting it aside. "Nah," Malik shot back, dribbling the ball between his legs. "Because y'all old." The game that followed was full of trash talk and laughter. By the end, they were out of breath, and Malik stood there, grinning. "You know," he said, twirling the ball on his fingertip, "I never thought I'd see cops actually try to be part of this neighborhood." Carter wiped sweat from his brow. "Neither did I, to be honest." Malik nodded. "Keep it up. Maybe people will actually start believing it." It wasn't a promise of trust, but it was a start. Just when Carter and Reynolds thought they were making progress, a call came in one evening that shook them to the core. Shots fired at Eastside Park. Multiple victims. Suspects on foot. They arrived to chaos, sirens, flashing lights, and terrified bystanders. On the ground, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the shoulder, was Malik. Reynolds dropped to his knees beside him. "Stay with me, kid," he urged, pressing down on the wound. Malik's eyes fluttered. "Told you, you were old," he mumbled weakly. Carter clenched his jaw. "You're not going anywhere, you hear me?" The paramedics arrived, and as they worked, Carter scanned the crowd, looking for witnesses. An older woman, shaking, pointed toward a dark alley. "They ran that way," she said. Without hesitation, Carter and Reynolds sprinted in pursuit. The adrenaline pumped through them as they turned a corner and spotted two young men fleeing. "Police! Stop!" Reynolds shouted. One suspect hesitated, looking over his shoulder. The other kept running. Carter tackled the one who had paused while Reynolds chased after the second. A few blocks later, he had him in cuffs. Back at the scene, Malik was being loaded into the ambulance. As the doors shut, he lifted a weak fist. Carter bumped it gently. "Get better, kid," he said. Days later, Carter and Reynolds sat in the hospital, waiting for Malik to wake up. When he finally did, he smirked weakly. "Y'all really sat here all night?" Reynolds shrugged. "Gotta make sure our best trash talker pulls through." Malik chuckled, wincing in pain. "Guess I owe you one." Carter shook his head. "You don't owe us anything. We just want you to make it." For the first time since they started their journey, they didn't just feel like officers in the community. They felt like part of it. Malik's recovery was slow, but Carter and Reynolds checked on him regularly. They weren't just doing it as cops, they genuinely cared. Every time they visited, Malik's walls came down a little more. One evening, as they sat by his bedside, Malik finally opened up. "I used to think y'all were just another set of badges that didn't give a damn," he admitted. "But you stayed. You showed up. That means something." Reynolds leaned forward. "We're trying, Malik. We know trust doesn't happen overnight." Malik nodded, his voice quiet. "Yeah. But it starts somewhere." Meanwhile, on the streets. As Carter and Reynolds worked to mend their relationship with the community, some of their fellow officers weren't as supportive. Not everyone in the department liked the way they were handling things. One night, after a long shift, Officer Grayson, a veteran cop known for his old-school ways, confronted them in the locker room. "You two got soft," Grayson sneered. "Spending more time playing basketball with kids than actually doing your jobs." Reynolds clenched his jaw. "Our job is to serve this community, not just patrol it." Grayson scoffed. "Keep thinking that. One day, you'll need backup, and let's see who comes running." Carter stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "If the only way to get your respect is by abusing the people we swore to protect, then we don't need it." The tension was thick, but Carter and Reynolds didn't back down. That night, as they left the station, Reynolds sighed. "We're making enemies in our own house." Carter nodded. "Yeah. But we're making real allies outside of it." A few weeks later, Carter and Reynolds were responding to a domestic disturbance call in a rough neighborhood. When they arrived, they saw Grayson already there, his hand on his holster, yelling at a frightened woman and her teenage son. "Step away from him, ma'am," Grayson barked. "Your boy's got a record, and he's coming with us." The mother sobbed. "Please, he didn't do anything." Carter stepped in, his voice calm. "Grayson, let's de-escalate. We don't even know what's going on yet." Grayson glared. "I've been doing this longer than you, Carter. I know how these people operate." Reynolds' stomach turned. "These people." Carter took another step. "We're handling this differently." The teenager, shaking with fear, pleaded, "I didn't touch her. My stepdad came home drunk and started hitting my mom. I tried to stop him, and he ran off before you got here." Carter turned to the mother. "Is that true?" She nodded through her tears. Reynolds glared at Grayson. "You were about to arrest the wrong kid." Grayson's face hardened, but before he could respond, Chief Patel arrived. Someone had called him. "What's going on here?" Arjun asked. Carter turned to him. "Bad call, Chief. The kid didn't do anything." Arjun looked at the mother and son, then at Grayson. "Go back to the station," he said firmly. Grayson hesitated but knew better than to argue. He shot Carter and Reynolds a furious look before walking away. Arjun turned back to them. "You did the right thing." The teenager wiped his face, still shaken. "Thank you." Carter placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Just stay on the right path, okay?" Word spread quickly about the incident. Some officers started questioning the way things had always been done. Others resented Carter and Reynolds even more. One day, as they sat in their patrol car, Carter sighed. "You think we're actually making a difference?" Reynolds nodded. "Yeah. Because a year ago, no one in this town would have expected cops to listen before they acted. Now, they know at least two of us will." Carter smirked. "Guess that's a start." Months turned into a year. Carter and Reynolds continued their work, knowing change wouldn't happen overnight. Some officers left the department, unwilling to adapt. Others stepped up, inspired by what they saw. One afternoon, while on patrol, they saw Malik, fully recovered, coaching a group of younger kids on the basketball court. As they walked up, Malik grinned. "Look who's back. Y'all ready to lose again?" Carter laughed. "Depends. You still talk as much trash as last time?" Malik nodded. "Of course." Reynolds grabbed a basketball and spun it in his hands. "Then let's play." The game began, but this time, it wasn't just about basketball. It was about trust. About community. And about proving that real change, no matter how slow, was always worth fighting for. As Carter and Reynolds continued their work, something remarkable happened. More officers started following their lead. Not all, but enough. Patrols became more than just routine drives through neighborhoods. They became opportunities to connect. Officer Grayson, however, was a different story. His resentment only grew. He saw Carter and Reynolds as traitors, weak cops who cared more about making friends than enforcing the law. One evening, while Carter was reviewing case files at the station, Reynolds stormed in, his face tense. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, tossing a report onto the desk. Carter skimmed the document. It was a complaint from a community member about an excessive force incident, one involving Grayson. "Damn," Carter muttered. "What did he do?" Reynolds clenched his jaw. "Kid was stopped for matching a description. Grayson roughed him up pretty bad before realizing he had the wrong guy. No charges, no apology." Carter exhaled sharply. "So what's the department doing about it?" Reynolds sat down heavily. "Nothing. The report's buried. No body cam footage 'cause Grayson forgot to turn it on." Carter felt his stomach twist. After everything, some things still hadn't changed. A week later, everything came to a head. Carter and Reynolds were responding to a call about a stolen car when dispatch crackled through their radio. "All units, officer in distress. Shots fired. Officer down, 10th and Maple." That was Grayson's beat. They raced to the scene, sirens wailing. When they arrived, they saw Grayson on the ground, clutching his leg, blood seeping through his uniform. His gun lay a few feet away. Standing over him was a man, young, shaking, holding a pistol. "Drop the weapon," Carter commanded, raising his gun. The man, Devon, the same kid they had talked down months ago, had tears in his eyes. "He pulled me over for nothing. Started messing with me, saying I was one of those types. He reached for his gun first. I swear, I was scared." Carter's pulse pounded. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Reynolds kept his voice steady. "Devon, listen to me. We know you're scared. But if you pull that trigger again, everything changes. Your whole life, gone." Devon's hands trembled. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to die." Carter slowly lowered his weapon. "You don't have to. You have a choice right now. Drop the gun, and we'll figure this out. For what felt like an eternity, Devon stood frozen. Then, with a choked sob, he dropped the pistol and sank to his knees. Reynolds quickly secured the weapon while Carter cuffed Devon gently. "You did the right thing, man," he murmured. "We'll make sure they hear your side." As paramedics loaded Grayson onto a stretcher, he locked eyes with Carter. There was no gratitude, only anger. Even after they had saved his life, he still saw them as traitors. But Carter didn't care. Because tonight, they had saved 2 lives. Devon's case sparked a firestorm. Witnesses confirmed that Grayson had initiated the confrontation. The body cam footage, this time, properly activated, showed him escalating the situation unnecessarily. For the first time in years, the department took action. Grayson was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. He later resigned under pressure. Devon, thanks to Carter and Reynolds advocating for him, avoided serious charges. Instead, he was placed in a mentorship program, one Carter and Reynolds helped create. Months later, Chief Patel called Carter and Reynolds into his office. "You two changed this department," he said simply. "But there's still more work to do." Carter crossed his arms. "What are you thinking, Chief?" Arjun smiled. "I want you both to help train the next generation. We need officers who see things differently. Who understand that a badge isn't just about power, it's about responsibility." Reynolds grinned. "You're asking us to teach cops how not to be like we used to be." Arjun chuckled. "Something like that." Carter nodded. "We're in." One evening, Carter and Reynolds walked through the same neighborhood where, a year ago, they were feared. Now, they were welcomed. Kids waved. Shop owners greeted them. And on the basketball court, Malik and Devon stood, coaching a group of younger kids. Malik spotted them and smirked. "Y'all still suck at basketball." Carter grinned. "Only one way to prove it." As the game began, Carter looked around and realized, this was what real change looked like. Not just one moment. Not just one case. But a community, rebuilt. And this time, they weren't just cops. They were part of it. The days rolled on, and the changes continued to unfold. Carter and Reynolds, once just officers on the beat, were now mentors, guides for a new generation of law enforcement. As they helped shape the future of the department, they felt a deeper sense of purpose than they had ever experienced before. Their new recruits were different. Eager to learn, eager to listen, eager to do better. Carter and Reynolds spent hours in training sessions, teaching these young officers how to navigate complex situations with empathy, how to approach community members not as suspects, but as people, how to see them. The first time one of their recruits approached a group of teens on the street, Carter observed from a distance. The rookie hesitated, unsure, but then smiled and asked the kids if they needed help. Instead of intimidation, there was curiosity. Instead of authority, there was respect. It was a small moment, but Carter knew it was the beginning of something larger. Later that evening, Carter and Reynolds stood in the park, watching their recruit play basketball with those same teens, laughing, learning, and connecting in a way they had never seen before. "I think we're actually doing it," Reynolds said, his voice full of wonder. Carter nodded. "Yeah. They're getting it. One day at a time." One night, the phone rang. It was a call from a different part of town, a quiet neighborhood that had never seen much interaction with the police. But tonight was different. There was an altercation, something small at first, but escalating quickly. Carter and Reynolds arrived to find a group of teenagers surrounded by officers, tensions rising. As they approached, one of the kids shouted angrily at an officer. "Stop treating us like we're criminals. We're not the problem, you are." Carter stepped forward, his hand raised in a calming gesture. "Hey, listen. What's going on here?" A girl with dreadlocks, barely 18, looked up at him, her eyes full of frustration. "We just wanted to talk about what happened to Malik. He was your friend, right? Why isn't anyone listening to what really happened?" Carter felt a pang in his chest. Malik's story had sparked an uprising in the community, and despite the department's efforts to repair relationships, it was clear that there was still so much hurt. He glanced at Reynolds, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Let's sit down," Carter said softly. "Let's talk about it." For the next hour, Carter and Reynolds listened. The kids didn't hold back. They talked about their fears, their anger, and their hopes. They spoke of their frustrations with the system, how it seemed to always turn a blind eye to the pain they carried, and as Carter listened, he realized something important. This wasn't just about them, it was about all of them. About everyone who had ever felt unheard. About the collective healing they all needed. By the time they left the neighborhood that night, something had shifted. The kids, who had once viewed them as the enemy, were now talking with them, not at them. And it was clear that this moment had changed the dynamics, even if only slightly. A year after the incident with Grayson and Devon, Carter and Reynolds were invited to speak at a local youth summit. The theme was rebuilding trust, and both were nervous but determined to share their journey. It's not easy to admit when you've been wrong. But what's harder is acknowledging that change doesn't happen in one big moment, it happens in all the small, everyday decisions. In the conversations, the actions, the times we choose to listen instead of judge. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice steady. "We weren't perfect. But we realized that being a good cop isn't about power, it's about service. It's about making your community safer by being part of it. And that's the work we're still doing today." They looked out into the crowd, seeing the faces of kids who had lived through the same struggles, the same distrust. But in the air, there was something different now. Hope. Afterward, Malik found them in the crowd, a wide grin on his face. "You two are all right. You really came through for us. We couldn't have done it without you, Malik," Carter said, offering him a fist bump. "We're in this together," Malik replied. It felt like a full circle moment, one where they weren't just watching the change happen, but actively creating it. And though there was still work to be done, for the first time in a long while, Carter and Reynolds felt like they were exactly where they needed to be. In that moment, they understood that real change wasn't just about restoring trust with the community, it was about nurturing the relationships that made that trust possible. It was about service. It was about connection. It was about continuing the fight, together.